Hello. So I thought I'd continue the um, uh, the trend, the theme with the what year was it? I'm gonna guess. This was released in 2019. Might be off on that. The 2019. Let's see. Yay, 2019. Not that long ago, so I should know. 2019 album by Devin Townsend called Empath. Um, I bought this new. Sorry to continue the new CDs instead of secondhand, but just because I wanted to talk about this. I again, like the one I talked about yesterday, I was living in South Korea at the time and working there, and so I had to order it. Now, did I get anything with this? I don't think. I think I just got the CD. You know, when you order, there's always those bundles with different things when a new album's released nowadays, with the T-shirt, and Devin does a lot of a lot of different things you can get, like key rings and crap, like boxes and wooden boxes and personal drawings, and which I understand in this day and age to be a musician, especially someone at his level, because he's not really anywhere near a household name or anything like that. He's got a dedicated fan base, but you really need to kind of offer, I don't know what you'd say. I don't want to say in a cynical way, like he's kind of bleeding people dry, because it's not. But any musician at that level, obviously touring is a big part of their income, but merchandise is also a big part of their income nowadays, and sales of CDs alone and records alone, and certainly streaming alone, is not really enough to survive on. Anyway, so like I said, this came out in 2019, and this was the first album post the Devin Townsend project, which you might think, well, that doesn't sound that different, Devin Townsend and Devin Townsend project, and I agree, it's not really that different, but the Devin Townsend project was kind of like a band where he had a set of guys that he used for a series of albums over about a 8 to 9 year period, from Key through to Z2, I think, is the timeline, where he used the same drummer. He kind of switched out some for some of the albums, but basically the same drummer, the same bassist and guitarist, Dave Young, Beav, and Ryan was the drummer. And so it was kind of like a set thing. And then he talked about how he felt kind of hindered or tied down by that, and that he was actually, that period was actually a period of success for him. I think the album sold quite well, and his tours kind of, were increasingly getting more and more popular, and he was touring more and more, and but he was kind of sticking to a formula with the music he was writing, especially after those first 4 albums, which I talked about before, Addicted, Key, Ghost, and Deconstruction. The ones that came after that were quite formulaic and not that different from each other. And so I think he talked about how he felt he was kind of tied to that sound because it was doing quite well, and the record company wanted to continue with that. And also he was tied to these guys, the guys in the band with him, and that, he had to pay them a salary, and so it's kind of a financial burden as well. And so he dissolved that partnership, or whatever you want to call it, of the DTP, the Devin Townsend Project, and he went back to just himself and working kind of every project he did, every album or whatever touring cycle, he would pick out different players. He also talked about how this album was going to be a much more varied sound and a departure, and he kind of really played that up. He played it up sounds like he's lying. I'm not saying that, but the way he described before this had been released, he really said that it was a big change from the stuff he had been doing in the previous decade. And I will say it is different from that, but at the same time, there's a lot of overlapping sounds and elements and sonic, or whatever you want to call them. That I said in the last video that anything that he releases, Devin Townsend, is always going to have his certain signature or sound or whatever you want to call it on it. And I don't think he can really escape that necessarily for better or for worse. This was the, I don't know, it's the deluxe edition because it's 2 discs. Is pretty common that when he releases an album, he will give a second disc of usually things like, in this case, demos. And the demos, I should say, these versions are not, it's not like they've recorded on a 4-track in his bedroom. They could have been released as an album. They're album quality demos. Maybe need some mixing here or there, I don't know. I don't really know enough about sound to know that. But if you just put this on, it doesn't sound like a demo. So it's kind of like, I kind of see more of as an, the songs that weren't included on the album. He recorded all of them for the album and he chose these ones as opposed to those ones. And there's the man there. Empath. Now you can see here the hinge is broken. I'm pretty sure from memory that was broken when I got it. It broke in transit. Love and Be Loved. I don't want to force that out. God damn it. Because, you can't really bloody avoid that, can you? But anyway, there's the booklet. And he talked about this artwork a lot as well. I can't remember exactly who did it, but I'm sure I had a puzzle, like a 1,000-piece puzzle that was very reminiscent of that. Didn't have like these creatures and who the hell, that's Ziltoid by the looks of it. Ziltoid is an alien character that features kind of throughout his work. He did a Ziltoid album back in 2008, around that time, 2007 maybe. A kind of like a concept album of this alien who loves coffee. And then he's kind of popped up at other places in live concerts. I think he did a whole Ziltoid concert. And then he did a Z2 album, Ziltoid 2, which I didn't like anywhere near as much as I liked Ziltoid 1. But just this part here with the whales and the turtle and that kind of stuff and the sun and the mountains, I'm sure I've had a puzzle that looked very similar to that. Or something you might see in a New Age shop hanging on the wall without that beastie thing there. There's a spaceship up there, or a rocket or something. There's a couple of rockets. You got the lyrics. So it starts with Castaway. Castaway is kind of like a very soft start, let's say. Very calm and peaceful start. And then it goes into Genesis. And Genesis is kind of like take everything of Devin Townsend and throw it all into one song. It kind of goes through lots of different sounds. It's quite a big sounding song. Spirits Will Collide. So for me, Spirits Will Collide is just kind of like, that sounds like stereotypical 2010s era Devin Townsend writing and song. Not bad, not saying it's bad at all, but when he says, oh, it's a huge departure, I think, well, that song there could have featured really on Transcendence or Epic Cloud or Sky Blue. Evermore. Okay, that song. Sprite. I really like the first half of this song. Up to the part where it gets to that thank you part. So I say it's probably more than that. For the first 3 quarters, from there onwards, I don't like that song. I wish he had just stopped the song there. It's quite a beautiful song. And when this came out, so like I said, it came out in 2019. This is when my son was 2 years old. And I remember the day I received this in the post was around my son's birthday, his second birthday. And he had the flu, I remember, like actual flu, not, some people say, oh, I've got the flu when they've just got a cold or a bad cold, but actual influenza, if you had it, is a bitch. It really knocks you on your ass. I remember, I think I've had influenza maybe 2 or 3 times in my life. One time in particular, it just absolutely, like I was okay, I recovered and it was fine, but I remember it hits you like a truck out of nowhere. It's not like a cold where you wake up in the morning, you've got a scratchy throat, and as the day progresses, the throat gets more sore and you get a little bit like a headache or something, and then you get a blocked nose, and it kind of progresses over a 2 or 3 day period. With the flu, you feel a little bit off, and then like that, it hits you again like a truck. And you're just like, you're so exhausted and just, you're feverish, and it's just terrible. You can't control your body temperature. I remember being in the shower and I was freezing cold and blasting hot water on me. And then you get out and you get in bed, and then you're like, you're too hot. It goes the other way. And it's, anyway, the point of that was my son but luckily he had been vaccinated against the flu. In South Korea, vaccination doesn't have the same political, you know how nowadays that word is just, as soon as you say it brings out, I don't want to talk about this because, but I'm sure if you know what I mean, and 99% of people do know what I mean. You say that word and it brings out the crazies. And believe what you want to believe, that's fine. But it's like people want their fucking opportunity to blab their bullshit at you. And it's like, I've heard it all before. I don't want to hear it. And I don't mean like as I'm putting my head in the sand, is that whatever. In South Korea, that kind of political discourse or social discourse doesn't exist. It's just like, we get vaccines, of course you get a vaccine. And a child especially, the concept of not giving your child a vaccine, it would be utterly bizarre there. And I think part of that is because they are a recently developed country. They obviously had the Korean War in the early 50s, 1950 to 53. And the years after that, in the mid-late 50s, South Korea I'm talking. I'm not going to talk about North Korea because obviously I don't know exactly how people there think. But in South Korea, it was dirt poor. It was the poorest country in the world. It had a lower GDP than Somalia at the time. It was, the country had been obliterated. And with war and obliteration and poverty, it brings the diseases of poverty and things like cholera and tuberculosis, and then all the other kind of communicable and transmissible diseases and things like that. That's why even nowadays, tuberculosis is kind of an issue there because it's kind of baked into the population. Anyway, because a lot of people have that in their living memory of babies dying as infants and things like that. And then the advent of vaccination and the babies not dying at the same numbers that they used to, people were like, well, of course. I remember my grandmother told me about that, or my mother told me about that. And even into the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s, it developed so quickly that people my age, I'm only a young man in my mid-40s, people of my age, they have memories of kind of illness. And like I said, even now there's still illnesses there, even though you go there and it looks like, technologically developed and like clean streets and fucking, in many ways more developed than many other Western countries. But they still have the hangover or the remnants of these diseases of poverty. I've really got off on a tangent here. Sorry if you're watching this because you like Devin Townsend. The point What was I even talking about this for? That's right. My son got vaccinated for the flu, and therefore the flu didn't hit him very bad at all. He kind of just like shrugged it off. Me, I wasn't vaccinated that year. Some years I do get the flu vaccination. That year I didn't, and I caught it from him, and oh, god damn, did it put me on my ass. Again, same thing as my last experience. Just like feeling, oh, I'm okay. I feel a little bit off, and then bam, oh, I can't move. Just like utter exhaustion, like your body's made of concrete. Splitting headache, fucking sweating, freezing, and anyway, I got over it relatively quickly as well. But some people don't, and just this last. We're in winter here in New Zealand, and just this last 2 weeks, there's been 2 stories in the news of 2 children, a 14-year-old girl and an 11-year-old boy dying of influenza in New Zealand, which is so, you see the photos, they publish the photos of the kids in the news, and heartbreaking, doesn't even cover how awful that would be for the parents. But the connection to this album is that I connect receiving this album and listening to it initially with when my son's birthday and when he had the flu. That was a long way to go for not a lot of point. That song Sprite, for some reason, touched me emotionally at that time. There's a little part at the start of it, and it's like a story. Like a spoken word story, so you can see here, once upon a time in a tiny little town, a tiny little house, when no one came around, there lived a bird who was just so sad. For this little bird didn't have a mum or a dad. He'd forgotten how to fly, and he'd lost the will to try, until one day a bear came around, and the bird heard its terrible sound, and through his fear, his courage did appear. He lifted once more from the ground. And you think, well, it's just a child's basic fairy tale, and it is, but it's the way that it's used as an introduction with the music in the background. I don't know. For some reason, it kind of does. It always hit me emotionally, and it always reminds me of my son for some reason. Maybe because he's a kid, and that's kind of sad. And then the song itself is quite beautiful as well. I'm not going to read all the lyrics, but basically he's saying, we're saying lots of things, but basically, don't hide your feeling, show your true heart. Everyone has a sadness in them. Every person you see on earth, every person you look around, even people you don't imagine. So there's a kind of a line in it that again always kind of connected, and this one. Monsters and robots are brokenhearted. Octopus lovers are brokenhearted. Dad in the garden all brokenhearted. And you kind of think, we think about our parents, or when I was a kid, my mum and dad. And now I'm kind of the age that my dad was when I was a kid. When I was kind of started having memories of kids. And I was thinking, like, I know all the things that I feel in my heart, or memories from my past. And I think my parents had the same thing when when I was a kid. But when you're a kid, you don't look at your parents as these 3-dimensional humans with, of course, with feelings. I love my parents dearly, but I mean as in they're mum and dad. They are the kind of the alpha and the omega at that stage, and you don't really think of them as having pain of emotional type things. And anyway, there's the other image. This is all tongue-in-cheek with Devin Townsend. He's not 100% serious. There's a certain kind of, satire to his work, but at the same time, a certain seriousness with it. A certain irony with a wink and a nudge. Hear Me, that's a good song. Why? Sounds like a musical number from a Broadway show. A lot of people really love that song. Quite a different, that's truly a different type thing for him. My voice is giving up. More new agey posters. Borderlands, a nice song. Kind of has the feeling, when I think of that, I think of the video game Borderlands that I used to actually own. back in the day when I used to play video games before my son was born, I remember having the game Borderlands on PlayStation 3. And so the song itself has got kind of a beach, warm, sunny vibe. Requiem is an instrumental, quite a beautiful instrumental, kind of orchestral. Almost sounds like it'd have a place in a movie or something, like a soundtrack. And then we come to the Singularity, which is it's about 20 minute song broken into various parts, kind of like chapters. Adrift, I am I, there be monsters, chorus gods, silicon scientists, here comes the sun. So I've never really listened to the lyrics deeply, but basically it's kind of like, I think looking at the ego, but also identity and self and its correspondence maybe eventually with technology. You know, we got AI, and that's kind of this part here. Silicon Scientist, he uses this vocoder kind of robotic effect on his voice, so it sounds like a computer or something, robot talking. And then Here Comes the Sun is kind of like this beautiful crescendo to the Singularity and the whole album. And there's a solo on it, and I was very proud of myself the first time I heard this. If you hear the solo, I thought that solo sounds like a Steve Vai solo. It's got a Steve Vai tone to it. Lo and behold, I read the liner notes, and yes, Steve Vai had a guest spot soloing on Here Comes the Sun in the Singularity. Now, I'm sure all this artwork has meaning, but I don't know what that meaning is. All music, lyrics written, engineered, produced, and mixed by Devin Townsend. So it was a full-on project that he undertook himself. Except we've got a few little credits there for Mike Keneally, who he works with a lot. Morgan Argren, who I talked about yesterday, who he featured on Casualties of Cool. He played the drums. Co-produced by Mike Keneally. Artwork, if you're interested, by Anthony Clarkson. So some of the other musicians. Morgan, I said, is a drummer. Anup Sastry, drummer. Seamus Paul Sally. He's on YouTube. He's like a crazy drummer, like one of those drummers you see on YouTube who just fucking can do anything, can do absolutely insane stuff on the drums. Nathan Navarro on the bass, Mike Keneally with the additional guitars and keyboards. Annick van Giersbergen. She's sorry, excuse me. She's worked with him quite extensively throughout the last kind of, up till now, the last kind of 15, almost 20 years. She featured heavily on those first couple of Devin Townsend project albums, and then also the ones through the 2010s, like Epic Cloud and Transcendence. He likes her as like a foil, you know, the male and the female together. He's commented before on how much her voice he feels brings out the best of his voice. We also see Che Amy Dorval, who we talked about yesterday, his co-vocalist on Casualties of Cool. She features on this. She sung on Genesis. Chad Kroeger, the man himself from Nickelback, a fellow Canadian. He does backup vocals on Hear Me. To be honest though, I've never been able to pick them out. I can't hear him. I can't hear and think, oh, that sounds like Chad Kroeger. And Chad Kroeger's got quite an identifiable voice, doesn't he? Just last night I was driving home, a Nickelback song came on the radio. That one, their most famous one, How You Remind Me. And I was thinking he does have quite you can pick out his voice easily, but that's kind of a screamy song, so maybe he's doing quite screamy vocals, and so it doesn't sound like him. Steve Vai, guitar solo, like I said, on Here Comes the Sun. And a bunch of other people who I don't know. Now it says project coordinated by Jasper Shermans. Jasper, I think, is like his manager or something. Because I remember when I talked about yesterday when I didn't get my original GoFundMe CD that I'd paid for, the guy who sent me an email replied saying, we'll send you another one. What's Jasper, I remember. So maybe he's all over Devin's business and takes care of that kind of side of things. There he is with a dolphin. Devin, thanks. I know Tracy is his wife, and Rain, I think, is his son. Mum, Dad. Can we see anyone famous? If I look, I'm not going to read through every single one. There's the guys from Devin Townsend Project: Mike St. John, Dave Young, Ryan Van Poderoyen. No, I'm sure. Oh, Jeremy Jasta, I've heard of him before. He's the guy from, was it Hatebreed? Isan from Emperor. Meshuggah. Perhaps the greatest metal band that's ever existed. Chris Jericho, the wrestler. Remember Y2J? And let's finish off by looking at this, because this is kind of like him commenting on it. Maybe not finish off it. Hey, I'd like to write a little here about my intentions for this album. I've been holding it up to the light for the whole process and hope that the effort and difficulty that went into this project ultimately helps people. My career has spanned several decades, and I have been trying to work through the phases that present themselves in order to learn more about myself. I knew that Empath was on the horizon several years back when I became restless in my musical world and began to feel a pull towards something uncompromising. He's talking there about leaving the Devin Townsend project. I felt a need to confront a fear of myself on some level if I was ever going to be able to progress as an artist. Result is this album you hold in your hands, and it was a heck of an experience bringing it to completion. It's not an easy listen, but I hope my reasons for doing it are clear. It was about taking it all apart and laying it out for myself to take stock of. I can understand that does kind of sound. The album does really kind of sound like a culmination of a lot of the stuff he had done previously, as he says there. I needed to explore a lot of avenues, and it took me to some frightening places. By the end of the process, though, the resolution that came from going there proved to me that I had become capable of moving past it. The theme of Empath was always about going into that fear, the uncertainty of life and middle age, then confronting it and coming out the other side of it with some sort of realization. Although life is not easy, it can be within us to rise to these occasions that are demanded of us. And I wanted to write something that represented many angles of my life with an overarching theme that was ultimately is one of hope in uncertain times. In a world that is more divided than ever, Empath was written in order to participate in all those emotions that bubbled up over the last 2 years without judging them or letting them define the process. I feel that when we do so, we are more able to understand how others different from us may feel. Empathy is a trait that seems to be equated to weakness in this day and age, when ultimately it is the one thing that could help us understand each other. Music, in my opinion, does not come from us individually. Maybe it comes from a collective pool of human experience, and artists ultimately have the job of pulling that from the ether, filtered through our own trip, and then simply trying to do a good job in representing it. Regardless, I'm proud to be able to play for you all and hope my work in a small way does justice to the inspiration from the infinite source. I'm humbled by it. Thank you to the countless people who help and support me. Blah, blah, blah. Thank you, people. My intention with representing this music is only to help and honor. I hope you enjoy this and hope you may find some catharsis here. Please take care of yourself and let's stick around. We can do this. Don't give up. With all my love and light, Devin Townsend. New Year's Eve 2018. I will say that subsequently, so if we think what he's done since then, the year after this, COVID happened. And affected a lot of people and artists and musicians, especially, well, not especially, that's not fucking true, but I mean as in, let's say in their work, it affected them. Don't want to overplay this. As in they couldn't tour and perform, which, like I said, nowadays makes up a large chunk of professional musicians' income. He did a lot of live performances, like on YouTube, like stream type stuff. And then he did the Puzzles and Snuggles albums, which I've listened to, but never really got a grasp of. And maybe I need to listen to them more. And a lot of that seemed to be him dealing with COVID and the COVID social issues of, lockdown and all that stuff. Then, what did he do after that? Oh, he did light work. And then the most recent album he's done is Power Nerd. Power Nerd, he explicitly said in the interviews before that, is that a lot of the work he's done, like Empath and light work, and throughout his career, he kind of comes across in his lyrics as though, especially since 2009, since the DTP era up until now, he comes across as though he's figuring it all out. He's almost got it all figured out. He's given up alcohol. He's given up drugs. He's embraced the whatever side of himself. He's kind of, what do you call it? He's accepts himself and all that, how that influences his life and how he connects with the world around him and all this kind of stuff. And from listening to his albums, you feel like that, or you think, and I remember Greg from the Dillinger Escape Plan, or formerly the Dillinger Escape Plan, Greg, is it Pucciato? I don't know how to pronounce that name, but now he's in Better Lovers with the guys who used to be in Every Time I Die, that kind of super group, if you're into that kind of music. He called Devin Townsend his Yoda, as in kind of some wise, content guy who's achieved nirvana and kind of got it all figured out. But with the Power Nerd album, he was basically saying, I don't have it figured out at all. All the same shit that attacks you attacks me, and sometimes I think I've got it over it, and then I haven't got it over it, and my life is constantly changing. That album in particular, he was dealing with but it was that part of his life where his son had grown up, and I think he was going away to university, which is crazy because in my mind his son's still a little baby from back in the kind of the mid 2000s. His wife, I think she got a job somewhere. They weren't divorced, but they were kind of living apart for a while because she had to work somewhere and he had to stay somewhere with his new studio, I think on Victoria Island in BC. And his parents were getting old and getting sick, and maybe someone died, I can't remember. And he kind of explicitly said in the interviews for that album, was like, this album, Power Nerd, I'm trying to say, I don't have a fucking clue. Maybe I've come across like I do, but I don't. Which in some ways I appreciated, but you can kind of see the juxtaposition between that and some of the other albums where it does sound like he feels he's close to kind of gaining enlightenment or whatever it might be. I don't know. Is that really important in assessing his music? No, of course it's not. But I think that kind of stuff, those themes thread their way through all his albums. And he's the man who writes the music. And he's putting those feelings that he has into the music. So it's all connected. And I guess it does matter in some way. The bonus disc is okay. It's got some good stuff. There's one particular song I like on it a lot, Gulag. That's a great song. I haven't really listened to the second one a lot enough to say I really enjoy it. I don't like Middle-Aged Man. I think that's really silly, and I don't like when he does those kinds of songs. The other one like that is Lucky Animals, which I think was from Epic Cloud. Again, it's just a stupid song. I guess it almost seems like beneath him in my way, like a waste of his talents, doing something so ridiculously one-dimensional and boring. But anyway, overall, it's a very good album. Would I say it's a great album? I'm not sure. If I think Ocean Machine is my favorite album by him, and I give that a 10 out of 10, it's almost like a perfect album in my opinion. And then something like Key and Ghost and Terrier, kind of the next level down that I really love, I kind of give them an 8 or 9 out of 10. Maybe I give this a 7.5 to 8. You know, something like Genesis and Sprite and Singularity, kind of those things, I would give them the 9s. But then things like Spirits Will Collide and Evermore, they kind of pull it down a little bit. They're kind of a little bit too samey or something. But overall, I'm picking holes in it. It's a very good album. Maybe I'd say 8. I think it deserves an 8 out of 10. All right, we'll leave it there. Sorry for the interlude, talking about flu and the vaccinations and a brief history of 20th century Korea. But we'll leave it there. Thank you.